Hello there, Seraphim17 once again. This is my Kingdom Hearts 2 Critical Mode video walkthrough. We're approaching Port Royal, the Pirates of the Caribbean themed level, and we have to do a little bit of gummy ship shooting to get there. I love the gummy ship sections, they make me smile. There's just something innocent and awesome about them, and I don't want to downplay the work that went into designing them, but they don't look like to me that they took all that much amount of time to do. It looks like a pet project that a group of people really enjoyed doing, and I think they really delivered. Like, the evolution of this mechanic can go so many different places, and I find it just baffling that it really hasn't, because shmups are one of those genres that have kind of become dinosaurs in gaming today, and I think that because of that, a lot of gamers have had their attitudes change and suffer because of it. And a good example is with things like continues and checkpoints and saving and all that kind of good stuff, or games where you barely have to do anything to win. Games that almost win themselves, that have very little player execution, very little, player importance. You could pass it off to your dog and he'd do a fantastic job. He wouldn't have a clue where he was, but he'd enjoy it and probably lick it a little bit, but still win. And shmups don't work that way. Like, the shmup in this game might a little bit, because it's definitely been, pacified compared to some of the older ones you can play, or even some of the new ones. But they were the greatest personification of just games. They were these tiny chunks of gameplay, because a shmup's full campaign can be beaten in like 20 minutes, some of them, even shorter or perhaps a little bit longer. But these are small pockets of pure gameplay. Generally very little exposition, very little bullshit, directly into the game. It's you versus the computer, it's your skills, it's everything you. And depending on how practiced you are and how much dedication you had to it, will depend on how good you are. And I think that is, if you distill it down, that is the finest part of gaming, when it is like that. I appreciate that gaming has evolved and there are other different priorities in it now, like multiplayer, and another example of this would be competitive multiplayer. Competitive multiplayer at a high level is gaming personified. It is the passion, it's the conviction, it's the enjoyment, it's the jubilation, it's everything coming together and coalescing into a beautiful overall picture. And shmups were kind of like that before there was multiplayer. There was the score chasing and competing with your friends, which has evolved now into the scoreboards of leaderboards on Xbox Live and things, where you compete with your friends list and so on and so forth. And I think that's kind of been missed now. And there's not a lot of people that A, remember it, or B, have an appreciation for it. It's one of those things, not everybody likes shmups. But I do think that there's a philosophy to them, which is more about the player getting better than the character in the game getting better. And I think that's a very important separation to make. There are two kinds of games generally. There are games where you start as strong as you'll ever be, but your understanding and ability improves as you play. So it doesn't matter where you are in the game, at the start or at the end, you can equally destroy if you are good enough to display those skills. Speaking of skills, this is a fight that cannot be won. These are pirates that are not in moonlight, and thus they do not have their zombie form and cannot be killed. After that little debacle, you get to fight them for real. So the pirates are pretty tricky, because once again they have moves that will stun lock you, and stun locks on critical mode can end in death. However, if you can get them to do the things you want them to do, the reaction commands can be very powerful. Anyone that has a gun is awesome, because you can reflect it back at him and kill him really quickly. However, if you're fighting in an environment where there is both light and shadow, if you knock them out of the one that makes them visible, you can't hurt them, and it leads to some incredibly frustrating sequences here. I recommend skipping some of those fights if you can, because you can always make up the levels somewhere else if you need them. It'll save you a lot of frustration, believe you me. But if you're comfortable with it, if you understand how it plays, feel free to kick their ass. It's more than doable. But back on the tangent I was saying about a generalization of types of games. The second type of game is the one where your character gets better. And I'm not saying either one of these is right or either one is superior to the other, but there is a big distinction here. Because if your character starts off completely fucking worthless and cannot do anything good. And then towards the end of the game, it's the complete reverse, where you're almost in God mode with abilities that would just ruin the entire game. There's obviously an advancement there that's not on the player's part. It can be, because by the time you've put 10 hours into a game, I would hope anybody's better at that game, or they've been incredibly lucky to get as far as they have. But if the character is improving, there is less room for the player to improve. Not always, but mostly you find you don't need to. This game is a fantastic example of that. This game gives you so many tools to win, losing comes scarcely. Which is why they've introduced concepts like critical mode and the level 1 restriction, where you can play the game at level 1. And you'd be surprised how many forums, how many videos, how many stream chats are filled with people asking, when is the earliest I can use stat increases on a level 1 playthrough? And the streamer, God bless his soul, well, I can't remember his name unfortunately, but he's very good at Kingdom Hearts, pretty much said it defeats the entire point of doing a level 1 playthrough. And the guy who mentioned it in the chat didn't seem to understand what he meant. He's like, what do you mean? Well, the point of level 1 is that you don't level up. And when you level up, you get stat increases. So, if you stay at level 1 and you forge the stat increases, then what is the fucking point? And at that moment, I loved that man for saying it. Because it's true. But it's this culture we have now of people looking for the easiest way to do things. This ingrained culture that makes my videos, you know, watched by people who have no interest in my channel or don't really like commentary and things like that. But that's what exists, and this game allows it affords the player so many ways to circumvent getting good at it, and that's what a lot of games are turning into. Because bear in mind, this is quite an old game, guys. This is pretty old, and even now, it was, you know, kind of made more casual to appeal to the Disney audience. But even so, the first game wasn't like that. If you remember, the first game had some incredible difficulty spikes. You also had nowhere near the control over Sora that you do have in this game. So there are goods and bads on both sides, but I think games where you're able to be as good from the beginning to the end will always be better in my mind than games that progressively make your character better. Because I think that you have to have the person you're playing as on a game be the best he can be outside of fancy things at the very beginning. Like, you can never ever gate off a good evade by doing X. You just can't do it. Look at Dark Souls 2. Dark Souls 1 and Dark Souls 2. I've done maybe 30 level 1 playthroughs on Dark Souls 1. I've done all the different classes, so technically not level 1s, and then I've done a ton of different restriction ones at level 1. I've done... you name it, I've probably done it. Dark Souls 2, I've done it once. And it was the most boring thing I've ever done on that game. Absolutely boring, because your roll is the worst it can be. Your roll has the least amount of iframes because your adaptability stat is low. And that's all because your character, his fundamentals get better as you level him up. And that should never be the case. Dark Souls 1, perfect. Demon Souls, perfect. Bloodborne, hopefully perfect. Oh, by the way, folks, this is the room where there's both shadow and light, and only in moonlight will you be able to see them and hurt them. So if you attack them when they're in the darkness, you're going to bounce off and they're going to counter you, and it's going to be bad. So just be careful. But a lot of games do it, and I'm hoping developers learn from this, or I'm hoping they somehow manage to get around it, or if they just realise that that's not how games are intended to be fun. And on my Akumu difficulty walkthrough for The Evil Within, somebody left a pretty damn derogatory comment against me, saying how I was complaining about this, and I was doing this, and I was doing that, and how the game was never meant to be played without upgrades on Akumu mode, and blah blah blah, you know. Insert insult here, insert defensive point here over gameplay mechanic that is objectively bad, and this person's defending it because he's sycophantic. Happens a lot, guys, it's kind of what gaming is. Oh, that sequence there looks a little bit like a failure, doesn't it? But believe it or not, that's what the game wants you to do. It then puts you back on the interceptor, and we can continue on with the level. But back to what I was saying, sorry. All of the criticisms that I was laying at the game were due to not having upgrades. And I was explaining why they make the playthrough that I was doing, or the walkthrough for the playthrough I was doing, even more difficult than it normally would be. All of the points I was expressing on that particular video would not have been mentioned if I had upgrades. That was the point. I wasn't upgrading, here are the difficulties that you'll face when you don't have upgrades. So the person just, at that point, completely loses any validity in his argument because he's mentioning silly things. But additionally, on top of that, the notion that a game is not meant to be played a said way is silly, because games have an extensive quality assurance testing period where they are played in every single kind of way you can imagine by a lot of very gifted players, some not so gifted, others even less so gifted, because they need to have a wide array of different skill levels banging on their game, from the sadomasochistic to the incredibly casual, so they can find all the holes and the bugs and things. The moment you put an achievement on a title or a trophy to beat it without upgrades, you are opening your game up to a whole host of people banging on it without upgrades. Which means you have to test to make sure that it works. You have to test to make sure that it's fair, or that it's at least passable. That way you don't get an infinite regression where you can't go any further because the game is impossible at that point. When you put a difficulty in your game that is meant to be challenging, incredibly challenging, so much so that you tweet about it, you have to know that people are going to take it on with no upgrades, because there are two incentives to do so. Thus, it will have probably been tested at some point. Is the game doable at that level? Of course it is. So to say that the game was never intended to be played that way is ridiculous, because if anything, playing the game that way teaches you more about the mechanics and more about the way the game plays than any other playthrough you can do, because you're spreading it the thinnest it can be and you're stripping it bare to show just how well does it hold up. And that's the ultimate test of a game, guys. If your game holds up in that extreme, what you've made is awesome and is worthy of so much praise, because it's an incredibly difficult thing to do. And that is why I try to play games in this way, and there are certain games that really don't benefit from it. Lots of games don't benefit from playing it that way. For instance, a very long time ago I tried to do a snub pistol only insane run of Gears of War 1, and my run got ended by a mechanic of the game. I got all the way up to the Theron pumping station in Act 3, when you're underground. And it's the first time Therons are introduced, and it's the first time the torque bow's introduced, and you start with Dom across a cavern, and the pumping station's in kind of the middle. And I got there with my snub, I took on the first few Therons, and I ended up getting rushed by one with a chainsaw. If you've played that section, it's happened to you before, because it happens a lot if you get too aggressive. And those Therons are really aggressive sometimes. And when it reloaded me back in, I had a Boltok, and it ruined the run, because there was nothing I could do. I couldn't restart or anything like that because it kept spawning me with a Boltok, and if I started the chapter from the beginning every time I died, just to get there to die once and have a Boltok, there was probably no way I was ever going to do it. And I knew for a cert I wasn't going to be able to beat Ram. There is no conceivable way I would have the bullets to beat Ram. The bullets just don't exist in that weapon to do the damage needed against that boss on Insane. But it didn't stop me from trying to do the challenge, and I got as far as I could with it, and unfortunately, as I mentioned, the game gave me a Boltok, and it was against my rules, so I had to stop. And I recommend that challenge for anybody if you want to try it, because it was really fun at the time. The restrictions are simple. The only gun you can shoot is the snub. You can chainsaw melee, and that's it. And the amount of times you're going to be sitting behind a piece of cover with no bullets, waiting for them to rush you so you can chainsaw them, happens a lot, and it's terrifying, but it was a really fun time back when I only had Gears of War 1. But there's a reason why Epic didn't put an achievement in for doing that, guys, because you couldn't do it. And that's one of the examples of something that cannot be done. However, to this day, I would have still been trying to beat Ram if I'd have been able to get to him, had I not stumbled across that problem I mentioned. And I suppose the moral of that little tangent, as we're doing this choppy nonsense on the screen here. This level is very simple, even if you're low level. Yeah, simple stuff, just try not to get hit too much. At this point I didn't realise there were 2 barrels left, even though there's that massive piece of hood up on the top left, because I thought I'd got them all. I was excited, I was staring at the pretty colours, and they're up there on the rest of the ship, so I spotted them, and I go and deal with them. As I was saying, sorry, the moral of the story is never let people tell you that something can't be done until you've tried it. Because the internet is full of shit. All of it. This video's full of shit, guys. Every single thing you hear is someone's opinion, and just because it's an opinion doesn't mean it's right, doesn't mean it's respectable, doesn't mean you should respect it. So try it yourself, test it out, and if you prove it wrong, say so. If you have proof, even better. Because that's how we progress, that's how we get better, that's how strategies are made and evolve into something really great. Don't be the guy who says this can't be done and argues ignorance, because I just think it's incredibly sad. This is a very annoying fight as well. Every time I rush over to him and push him in shadow, I achieve nothing but getting really mad. And I'm getting just beat upon. But I got healed, which is awesome. So the block in this game, the timing on it is unique. I'm not going to go over how much I don't like it, because I've already mentioned that, and I don't want to just keep on, you know, flogging a dead horse. But the block on this game and the block on Birth by Sleep is very different, but they both work the same once they're initiated. At the beginning of a block, if you get a successful one, if any other attacks happen, you'll chain the block. And it's a really interesting mechanic, and I wish you could control it better. Because if you come up against somebody who does 3 quick hits, a second delay, and then a 4th hit, the 4th hit will hit you and you'll be in recovery frames, which means at that point it's completely unavoidable. Unless you somehow manage to squeeze another block out, or you manage to roll, or you get lucky and it whiffs. And this is something that happens a lot on Birth by Sleep. And I think it'd be nice if you could tap square to keep the shield up once it's been engaged, or just something. Like, I'm not asking to have a shield that you hold square and it's up for as long as you hold it, even though that would be awesome, Tetsuya Nomura. I'm not necessarily asking for that, I would just like a little bit more control over it. Like, it's... I put a video the other day of me dying against arguably the hardest boss in Birth by Sleep, and a lot of people think it's the optional bosses, but the optional bosses aren't that bad. Some of them are long, but they're not too bad. The Terranaut fight at the end, especially when you're playing as Terra, because that's the only time you can fight him outside of the secret episode, or the final episode, is just a fucking wind-up. Because not only is the enemy have a dash, but they also have the ability to stun you with the Sonic Blast, or whatever it's called, which is a move that Terra gets, and the computer spams it against you and gets perfect immunity through the entire thing. So, not only can the computer spam evade, which gives them invincibility, but they also have the ability to get you stuck in these chain attacks that can hit you when your guard comes down if they delay them in a specific way. So, the best way to damage them is to counter them, because attacking them conventionally gets you trapped in their combos, which are one-hit kills, by the way. On my file, anyway. So everything is put against you at this point, and then they give this boss the ability to heal. And I don't know where you stand about bosses healing. I, for one, think it's lazy, unless it's done well. A good example of a boss that heals that's done well is Metal Gear Rising. The last boss on that game starts to do a healing spell. I say spell, all he does is kind of like squat and do a little turd and this weird thing glows on his back. But if you panic and attack him, he counters you and you die. It's that simple. If you don't attack him, he'll heal. However, if you figure out the mechanic there on how to stop the heal, you can stop it without him getting any life back, and you can get an opening to do a lot of attacks. If that isn't perfect design, I don't know what is. And a lot of people accuse me of being a Platinum fanboy. Not the case. I love Platinum games, but I also like games that work, and that works perfectly. The heal that Terranaut does, doesn't. Because the best range to fight that encounter is mid-range. He can heal as quick as any heal in the game, recover immediately, and by the time you've covered the distance, he's attacking you. And if he hits you and it's that combo, you're dead. And that could be 5 minutes into the fight after he's just healed a full bar. And you just ask yourself, who put this in the game? Why did they put this in the game? It adds nothing to it. This is a fight that would be very simple if it was completely different. But as it stands, I don't think anybody can enjoy that fight for what it is, because it's boring. But thank you very much for watching, guys. I apologise if you don't want me to talk about Birth by Sleep, but this is a really simple mission. All you have to do is beat up some pirates and listen to the awesome Jerry Bruckheimer tunes. Even though Toad Jerry had nothing to do with the music, I'm almost certain. But thank you very much for watching, and you take care now.